The budget deficit for last financial year is lower than originally forecast. The Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has just released the final budget outcome for the 2024-25 financial year. Political reporter Stephanie Boris joins us now live. Hi there, Steph. Tell us more about these figures.
So the financial budget outcome is basically taking a look at what the predictions were for the financial year just finished and just checking if those figures are completely accurate or if they need to be updated. So there have been a number of updates to those figures. The biggest one there is the deficit. It's around $10 billion for last financial year. The forecasts initially were more up around the $28 billion mark. So that's quite a substantial drop. The government saying the main reason for this is because of more Australians being in work and therefore paying taxes and earning more. So if you're earning more, then there's more tax being paid, and that money of course goes back into the government's budget. The suggestion being that the government is potentially relying slightly on bracket creep to get itself through with this budget. The Treasurer Jim Chalmers though today insisting that the government is addressing that issue as well with the tax cuts that it's legislated and promised.
Our fiscal strategy is a combination of finding savings, $100 billion so far, showing restraint, banking 70% of upward revisions to revenue, and making room for our priorities. When it comes to bracket creep, we've shown an enthusiasm to return bracket creep last year, next year, and the year after. And there is a political difference there because we believe the best way to return bracket creep is to try and return bracket creep for all taxpayers and not just for people who are already doing relatively well.
So, Steph, what have the updated figures shown us about actual budget expenses?
Yeah, so when we're talking about expenses, it's the money the government is paying to different projects and portfolios. So what has been interesting to note is that spending on education is a lot less than previously budgeted. Also housing, the amount spent on housing is much less than had been budgeted, which is particularly interesting given all we've been hearing about in recent months, basically all of this year, is that there is housing stress across the country and governments at all levels are promising to do more to help with that housing stress, yet we're seeing the amount of money spent on housing actually being less than what was budgeted. The question was asked during the press conference as to why that was the case, not just with the education being lower, but also the housing. And the suggestion is that it's because the states and territories haven't been able to access the money set aside. Obviously, there's a lot of T's to cross and I's to dot, and it sounds like not all of that has been done. But it is slightly concerning to see that when we know that there is such a housing crisis across parts of Australia. Another interesting point to note as well was the tobacco excise revenue. So that's money the government is collecting from sales of tobacco. It's actually gone up a little bit. The Treasurer saying that is due to strict compliance measures. In terms of how the opposition has responded to today's figures, Opposition Leader Susan Lee spoke before all of these figures were released, but she insists that the government isn't doing a good enough job.
I gave a speech at the Committee for Economic Development Australia recently, which talked about the importance of fiscal guardrails and actually having budget rules that restrain spending. Because what we now see from this government is no rules, no guardrails, and $50,000 per minute in labour debt. The most rapidly growing item in the budget is repayment on debt. And the point I made is this is unfair to future generations of Australians who right now cannot realise the dream of home ownership, and it is totally unfair for them to have to pay back Labor's debt.
Now, since the federal election, the opposition is reviewing a number of its policies. So in terms of its suggested budget measures and key policy announcements, we are yet to hear a number of those.